Welcome to a slow, beginner-friendly lesson on reading and writing JSON in Python, made for absolute beginners. The bridge opens. Last lesson you learned what json is and how to read it by eye. Today you teach Python to do that reading for you. Python ships a built-in module called JSON that turns json text into Dixon lists, and turns Dixon lists back into json text. 4 functions cover almost everything: load, loads, dump, dumps. By the end you will read a JSON file, change a value, and write it back, the most common real-world workflow. 4 functions. The JSON module is part of Python's standard library. No install needed. You just write import JSON at the top of your file, and you have access to everything. The module's job is simple: translate JSON text into Python objects, and translate Python objects back into JSON text. 4 functions do almost all the work. 2 read JSON, 2 write JSON. The naming trick, S for string, tells them apart. Built in, the JSON module is a small, calm translator. Hand it text, get back data. Hand it data, get back text. 4 functions, 1 job each. It sits between 2 worlds and makes the crossing effortless. A small translator. Here is the module in action. Import JSON. Take a Python dictionary, name Ada, age 36. Call json.dumps on it. Dumps returns a string, a JSON string. Notice the type is str. You now have plain text you can save to a file, send over a network, or print to the console. Dumps means dump string. It serializes Python data into JSON text, without writing to any file. Dict becomes string. Load reads JSON directly from a file. You open the file with the with statement, just like reading text, and pass the file object to json.load. What you get back is a regular Python object. A dict if the JSON was an object, a list if it was an array. Here config becomes a dict, and you reach into it with normal key access. The JSON true has already become Python true for you. Read from file. Loads reads JSON from a string. Maybe the text came from a web response, a command line argument, or another part of your program, not a file. You pass the string to json.loads, and you get back a Python object. Notice the JSON true in the input became Python true in the output. Loads means load string, same parsing as load, just a different source, a string instead of a file. Read from string. The naming trick is small but you will use it constantly. Load takes a file object. Loads takes a string. The extra S stands for string. Same parsing, same result, different input source. If you forget which is which, say it out loud: load file, load string. The S is right there in the word string. Once you internalize this, you reach for the right function without thinking. S means string. Reading is half the story. The other half is writing, turning your Python dicts and lists back into JSON text that any program can read. The JSON module gives you 2 functions for this, mirroring the readers perfectly. Write it back. Dump writes Python data to a file as JSON. You open the file in write mode with the with statement, and pass both the data and the file object to json.dump. Python converts your dict to JSON text and writes it to the file. Notice Python's true becomes JSON true in the file automatically. You write normal Python, the JSON module handles the JSON spelling rules for you. Write to file. Dumps turns Python data into a JSON string, without writing to a file. You use it when you want to send JSON somewhere, a web request, a log line, a message to another process. Pass your dict or list, get back a string. The string uses correct JSON spelling, double quotes, lowercase true and false, null for none. Dumps means dump string, the mirror of loads. Write to string. By default, dumps produces 1 compact line, efficient for machines, hard for humans to read. Pass indent equals 2, and dumps adds line breaks and spaces so the structure becomes visible. Pretty JSON is what you want in config files you edit by hand. For machine-to-machine traffic, the compact default is fine. The indent argument lets you choose readability exactly when you need it. Pretty and readable. Sometimes you want JSON output to be stable, the same keys in the same order every time. Pass sort underscore keys equals true to dumps, and it sorts keys alphabetically. This is useful for comparing outputs, writing tests, or sharing config files where order should not matter. Combined with indent, you get clean, sorted, readable JSON. A small option with a real impact on how predictable your output is. Stable output. Here is the workflow you will use again and again. You read a JSON file into Python, it becomes a dict or list. You modify that Python object, Change a value, add a key, append to a list. Then you write it back to the file as json. The structure survives the round trip. This is how config files get updated, how saved data grows over time, and how state persists between runs of your program. Read, change, write. The round trip is the heartbeat of real applications. Read the world, change a small piece, write it back. Every config update, every save button, every sync works this way. The heartbeat, real JSON is usually nested, and Python handles it naturally because the result is just dicts inside dicts, or lists inside dicts. Reach into a nested value by chaining square brackets, user, then address, then city. For arrays, use an index, user, then roles, then 0 for the first role. This is exactly the dict and list navigation you already know, no new skills, just data coming from outside. Chain the brackets. Here is the full round trip in code. Read counter.json, a dict with a visits count. Modify it by adding 1 to visits. Write it back to the same file with indent for readability. 3 steps, each one small and clear. This is exactly how a visitor counter works, how a settings file gets updated, how any small piece of persistent state grows over time. Read, change, write, repeat. 3 clear steps. Here is a slightly richer example. Your tasks file holds a list of task objects. You read it, append a new task dictionary to the list, and write everything back. The whole file is rewritten. JSON files do not support partial edits. For small and medium data, rewriting the whole file on every change is perfectly fine. Only at large scale do you reach for databases instead. Append and save. If a JSON file is broken, a trailing comma, a single quote, a missing brace, json.load raises JSON decode error. The message tells you where parsing stopped, which makes debugging calm. Wrap the load in a try block and catch the error. Report the problem, fall back to defaults, or ask the user to fix the file. Robust programs expect malformed input and handle it gracefully. Catch the parse error. Notice what is happening. Every JSON object becomes a Python dict. Every JSON array becomes a Python list. That means everything you learned about dicts and lists in phase 0.5 applies directly. Square brackets for lookup. Len for counting. In for membership. Loops for walking items. Methods like keys and values. JSON is just another door into the same Python structures you already know. You already know this. Here is a complete example combining everything. Use pathlib to locate the settings file. If it exists, read it as JSON. If not, start with sensible defaults. Modify a value, here, the last open date. Write it back with indent for readability. 12 lines of code, and you have a persistent settings system. This is the shape of real configuration handling in almost every Python application. Real and complete. Import JSON, no install needed. Load reads from a file, loads reads from a string. Dump writes to a file, dumps writes to a string. The extra s always means string. Pass indent equals 2 for pretty output. Everything you read becomes dicts and lists, and everything you write starts as dicts and lists. The bridge between JSON and Python is small, clean, and surprisingly pleasant to use. Small and clean. Look at what you can do now. You can read and write plain text files. You can build and inspect paths with pathlib. You can read and write structured JSON data. Together, these 3 skills form the foundation of real input and output in Python. Almost every program you build from here on will use at least one of them. Next, we step back and look at how Python interacts with the wider operating system. The foundation is set. If you want to lock this in, try this short exercise. Create a small dict, name and a list of skills. Write it to profile.json with indent. Then read it back into a different variable. Compare the loaded data to the original using double equals. You should see true, the round trip preserved your data perfectly. Once that feels natural, you have crossed the JSON threshold for good. Round trip a dict. Thanks for learning to read and write JSON. You now have the foundation of real input and output. JSON is yours now.